Welcome everyone to Advisory Design Panel on April 18th. We'll just start by acknowledging that this meeting is being held on traditional Squamish Nation traditional territory. Can we get an adoption of the agenda? Someone to move? Rosalind? And then we would have adopting the minutes from the last meeting, which was January 17th. Second. Thank you. And our first point of business arising is development permit number 502 on Midway. Hand it over.
Thanks very much. So I'll just jump in and do my quick spiel here, and then I'll pass it along to the applicant's architect who's joined us today. So this is development permit 502. It's located at 38924 Midway in this southern end of the business park. They're proposing 2 new tilt-up concrete industrial buildings. The property zoned I1 light industrial, and it's located within and triggers development permit area 9, which is one of our new GP areas coming out of the newly adopted official community plan. And just to highlight a few things here, I'm actively working with the applicant right now. There's a few minor items that we're working to resolve. One's around the retaining wall and the fence. I'm also working with them on the garbage area to make sure that it's the right size and that it's wild, safe, and wildlife friendly. And also just some minor stuff around the landscaping and lighting details. And what I was hoping to receive ADP specific comments around was on the southern elevation of building B, so the second building to the south, and explicitly the south elevation of that, and as well as any comments you guys might have around the retaining wall and fence, which is a combination of the lock block with a chain link fence on top, which comes right along the northern edge of the property and kind of bisects into Midway, so there is a bit of a visual impact there, and any proposed solutions or comments around that are appreciated. So that's my 2 cents. If anybody has any questions for staff right now, I'll just pass it along to the applicant to do their presentation. All right, take it away, yes?
Hi, my name is Marco Ciriello. I'm the principal of Studio Architecture, the architect for the project. As introduced, the project is constituted by 2 buildings, 2 tilt-up buildings. One is divided in 2, the upper one, so it faces into directions. And the one on the lower part, instead, there are various units that go from the front of the building to the back of the building. So it's a multi-tenant. It has a mezzanine or second floor on top of each unit. There are a series of overhead doors. The access, there are 2 accesses to the site, one on the north part and one on the south part. So fundamentally, the traffic can make a loop around the site. Fire truck has been accounted for as a diagram. Because of the floodplain and the analysis for the flood hazard risk, then the entrance to the site has a couple of ramps that are 10 feet steep, or have a slope of 10 feet. There is a sidewalk that beside the driveway. There is a sidewalk that runs for the full length of the property on the left-hand side. There are 2 ramps, 2 handicap ramps that access both sides of the development. At the bottom part, the parking, the 2 sides of the parking there is connected by a walkway that provide a safe pedestrian movement. The landscaping in front of the building is sloping, but Mark will be more specific in the presentation. The landscape architect is here. Will be more specific in the presentation of the landscaping. There are two loading on the right-hand side at the bottom there, just on the corner, the northeast corner of the lower building. There are two loading bays, which provided the loading for the complete facility. The garbage is located on the upper corner of the property. There is interior landscaping that we have provided between the parking stalls. Other than that, well, the material is tilt-up glass. If we go through the elevation, for example, of one of the buildings, keep in mind one of the elevations, the colored elevations, yes. So it's a tilt-up glass. There are a series of canopies that are in steel, and those canopies are glazed. The building is characterized by by those. The loading bays are actually emphasized in color and form by just increasing the height of the tilt-up panel. There is ample fenestration on the building, which should provide a pleasant, livable space for the mezzanine or second floor. Other than that, well, there is actually a feature on on the east-west elevation of Building A, where we have created some elements where vine can actually climb up to the roof. To go to the other building. The expression on the other building is very similar to this one and unifies the architecture of the architecture of the two buildings, reading it as one complex, although there are two different buildings. Basically, that's the development. If there are questions, and landscape.
Not intend to go over in landscape, and I can do that quickly. Keep seated, that's fine. So a couple of things that we wanted to do. With the planter out in front, we, as sort of a nod to the developer.
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
We'll need you to come and sit a little bit closer to the microphone so that we can.
Why don't sit
So I'm recording. Perfect. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks very much.
Sorry about that. As a nod to the developer and their family, I wanted to go with a little bit of an Italian feel to that planter. And so that relates to the plants that you see in there, the rosemary, the bay trees, and the grasses that we've chosen there to create more of a Mediterranean feel. And in all the planters, we've gone with a low water or drought resistant planting. That was one of the choices we had. So you see the sage, and as I said, the rosemary. There are lavender throughout. And that was something we wanted in the smaller planters in between the parking. We went with a brighter choice of perennials to create a little bit of lightness and excitement in there. And again, they are relatively low maintenance. We revised the crosswalk that you see for the handicap accessibility to be broom finished concrete, and we believe that'll create enough contrast with the asphalt and create the safest possible moving material there. I think that's about it for the landscape that I can really mention at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will move into questions from the panel. Would you like to start, David?
Yeah. Did you consider any windows on the south elevation?
Sorry?
Did you consider any windows on the south elevation of building B?
We are talking about the south elevation. We could put a window. The issue here is that this is a warehouse, and therefore we'll need racking walls and so on. So it's we could put some, but would limit the use inside of the warehouse. So we have concentrated that this one being the back of the unit. We have concentrated actually on the fenestration on the sides that would impact the least on the layout of the racking. So that's why we didn't put anything there. It's really the back of the building.
Did you ever consider incorporating the two ramps together instead of having a redundant ramp? The barrier-free ramp?
On the site planning.
Yeah.
We could do that. We thought that, and that was our point of view, right or wrong, that it could be. But in this way, we would have preserved more landscaping because we were subdividing. Not only that, but we thought that perhaps the circulation could have been shorter in a certain way, because if you want to go to the lower level, you take one ramp and the upper level another.
Good. And did you do any site sections? I see building sections, but no site sections to see?
Yeah, we do have sections, and in fact, just answering one of the aspects, which was the fence, we have provided the section at the elevations, the height of the fence, which is including the retaining wall, will be 10 feet. So we'll really with the top of the chain link. And so if I can describe on the site plan, maybe the extent of it, because in the majority, if you go to the site plan, so we have block walls, lock block, and on top of that we have a chain link fence. That would be the solution at this time.
Okay.
If we go to the site plan, maybe I can describe where we're sloping the site, because in many parts, and zoom out, in many parts we are actually sloping the ground. So along the north property line and along the east property line, for a good portion we have the fence. However, for a portion, the lower portion of the east, we are sloping the ground, as well as sloping the ground on the south part, and evidently towards the road and towards the cul-de-sac will be all sloped.
Okay, good. And question to the landscape architect, why on the engineered bank is there no landscape treatment other than just seed?
It's quite steep, so without working with the engineer, we might come up with a landscape solution to that, something that we use. At this point, we were just imagining that the engineer was engineering that bank and leaving it as is. But if we were to add trees or something to block that wall, we would definitely need to work with the engineer and come up with a slightly different solution.
Thanks. That's the end of my question.
Thanks. Actually, just a question to staff. Just wondering if you can clarify what the future looks like for north and south of the development. For the policy context, it sounds like probably more of the same, but I'm just trying to determine what on that south end is going to be looking at that line fall, and then also those grades and the block retaining walls, if that's an interim condition or eventually everything's going to be graded to that.
Yeah, so for the first part of the question, the property to the south is already developed with a building that's been certified, so I don't see the land use changing from that existing industrial that's already there. Yeah, I guess you've got a little bit of the context there. And then we have no active applications for the property to the north, but it is zoned I1 and would in the foreseeable future be something of similar light industrial nature, and any proposed new buildings would need to meet that FCL requirement and would be elevating to a similar grade. So the stuff to the north would be very well matched, and the stuff to the south is kind of existing, probably aren't going to see any redevelopment there.
Okay, so it's not the same zone, it's not I1 zoning on the south?
It is I1.
It is, okay.
Yeah, it's developed already.
It's developed,
Yeah.
okay. I looked at a street view, it didn't seem to be developed, but it is, and you don't imagine it's going to change in the future. Okay.
If I can clarify, on that part we are sloping the road. So there is no changing, we try to be respectful towards that part. I'm presuming that the other side will be built up like ours fundamentally, because there will be a flat plane. So the retaining wall fundamentally will disappear eventually.
Right, okay, noted.
Visually.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Just to clarify, so for circulation from the accessible parking to the north side of Building A, you're proposing that somebody would go down one ramp along the street, up the other ramp to get to the other side of the building?
Fundamentally, at the moment, yes.
Had you considered joining these two ramps
We
in
could.
the middle so that it would go down, at least you'd have,
We
you would
could.
reduce the slope, 'cause you've got the maximum amount of slope on all of these ramps.
We could do that.
So-
So you have an easy access, yes, to both the developments without going down and up again.
Okay, that's my only question.
Sure. We will have to move, obviously, the PMT, the transformer, but that's easily done. Because in order to move then the ramp 5 feet away from the building, then we have to push the whole thing towards the cul-de-sac, which is doable.
Well, why, if it's existing to the building right now, why couldn't you just extend those to the middle at the bottom?
You get rid of the landscape in that area.
You're getting, yeah, but the ramp ramps this way, so this one is lower. So you have to go down and up again. We can do that, sure, of course.
So, again, speaking from the Public Art Committee hat, which I wear, what or any thought to points of public art to increase the aesthetic of the space, even though it's an industrial point in terms of the landscape architecture and that lovely big blank wall in the back, which there are many muralists that come through Squamish and live here in Squamish and would love to use that as a lovely canvas.
One option we thought about, and not the black back wall just because that might be hidden, but the vine growing wires, we could in some way incorporate a piece of art into whatever the final mesh structure is.
Yeah.
So there are opportunities
Opportunities there, yeah,
that would
because
be in the existing structure.
you can do living sculpture too in
Yeah.
your vine, where
Yeah.
you can sculpt the metal and have
So
vines go around.
talking from a point of view, a bureaucratic point of view, there is opportunity to contribute and then the city looks after, or you see more the developer, in fact, looking after that aspect? How
It
do
can
you
be
see
both, it can be a
That's what I mean,
partnership,
can be a
I
part-
believe. I can't speak for the municipality, but we've done other pieces
So we
of
can
art.
explore, so
Yeah,
we
it's
can
a point
explore
of
which way is
exploration,
better.
is we're
which
looking at
way
other
is
places
better.
where
Yeah, there is
we share.
opportunity though, is to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is an opportunity.
But even the planters, I don't know, are they concrete planters, or are they what kind of planters?
So these are mostly concrete curbs, they're not raised planters.
Oh, they're not raised,
No.
okay,
So,
right.
yeah. So
Because
there's
that
no
has
real-
been used.
Yeah.
If they were raised.
We try to slow
Yeah.
as much as we can
Okay.
to create
Yeah.
a visual continuity, like if it was a natural hill, just to give you an
And
analogy.
the real opportunity is that face of that building.
The faces,
We do have that
the two.
vine, and when we grow vines on, could be
Sculptural.
designed.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of flexibility there.
Okay, thank you.
Just to, perhaps we could see circulate a materials board. And then there's a transportation consultant that looked at all your loading access and.
Yes, it does work.
That's it.
Regarding the site plan and circulation, what kind of vehicle did you drive around this site to get, particularly around the corner where the garbage is?
Those are SU9, which is a 5-ton, 30-footer. The same size as you would have the garbage.
Okay.
Because those are smaller units, so they will need only small trucks.
And there's two buildings here, and was there any consideration on sort of one longer building going north-south?
Yes, we
Simple
have
plan.
considered that, and we found that for the program of the client, this one was the best configuration. It suits the client's program.
Okay. You got more units?
And marketing, exactly, that's right.
You got more units going this
More
way?
units, more fenestration, more perimeter walls and so on. So truly we did analyze alternatives, smaller units as indicated.
Okay, and with that seated engineered bank on the south and what east side, how are you dealing with drainage off that to the neighbor to the south?
We will have at the bottom a bioswale that will catch the water, but sort of a bioswale or a swell that will catch the water with gravel and so on.
Okay, okay. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
With regards to the elevation to the south, I appreciate you had mentioned that there was a program, an internal programming that was driving how that facade was working. But in terms of just in the building, there's 3 different paint colors that are being utilized to indicate some depth to the building. What were some potential explorations that you did to the south facade to use those different colors, and maybe why, speak to why?
It would be a very good thing. It would be an interesting thing, yes, because it would actually very easily create some interest there. Yes.
Are these concrete tilt-ups modular pieces?
I'm sorry?
The concrete tilt-up?
Yeah, those are modular. Those are modular, so they are tilt up on the ground.
Right.
So they put it the slab, they pour it on the ground, and then they tilt it up. So it's a sort of half prefabricated on-site. It's not prefabricated off-site, but it's prefabricated on-site.
Okay.
So each line is caulked, and is the joint between the panels.
Sounds good. The vines climbing on the structure, are those, it seems in the elevation that it's floating. Is there a floating box, or is it actually on terra firma?
No, it's not terra firma.
Okay.
It comes from the ground up.
Okay. And then just in terms of some grades in the parking, I presume the parking was graded by a civil engineer?
Yes.
And I'm just noting in the central parking that there's 5% on both sides, and just, I would encourage, or just asking the question of what the grading, if there's a grading rationale for why we're seeing 5% in the middle as opposed to something.
Yeah, we have in order to maintain the 10% and so on, this was studied very carefully in order to slope down, and I don't believe that it's all the 5%. At a certain point it's 5%, but then it becomes gentler.
Okay. Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. All of my questions have been answered already, except for one. Inside the buildings, you show a mezzanine. Are you spec building that mezzanine?
Sorry?
Are you building the mezzanine?
We are building the mezzanine.
You're
Yes,
building the
from the
mezzanine
start.
as shown in there. It's
From the
not,
start,
not
yes.
yet to be built by whoever the tenant is. Okay, just curious about that. And that's it for questions. So we'll move into comments. Want to continue the direction? Hey, David?
Sure. My comments would be to encourage some treatment of that south elevation, whether it be the colors or some windows or just some interest. It looks like it's a little bit forgotten with the rest of the elevations. That's the only one really specific that I have.
Can I ask a question of staff before I start my comment?
Oh, certainly.
Okay. Is in the DP requirements, is there any requirement to have any buffer or landscape at all perimeters?
I don't believe so. It's on the back of the staff report. I think there's something that speaks to fencing, and that's it. Yeah, so it's just 42.10D. It says landscaping features should be provided to reduce the negative visual impact of chain link fencing visible from roads or residences.
But not neighbors, okay. Okay, good. Okay, my comments, I guess I would try to be a better neighbor and look at those edge conditions. I recognize that the floodplain requirements on the adjacent lots, as those develop, will make that no-post wall go away. But then, I mean, it is an industrial area, but it just seems a little harsh to be asphalt right up to the chain link fence. I don't see any attempt for stormwater management versus just sticking it into storm drains, so I would encourage that in some of the landscape spaces if that's possible. The south elevation of the building, I'd probably resist tarting up the building, but do a better landscape treatment in that case. Maybe as, you know, it's a good canvas for art or some kind of articulation that might make it a little more impressive and less attractive to tagging. So maybe look at that landscape treatment. That's actually one of your bigger landscape areas, and it's kind of a throwaway, and if it's just seeded, then somebody's gonna have to go back there and fly mow it. So encourage you to improve that. And I would encourage you to kind of rethink the ramping and make it, you know, a little more, combine the two, maybe more efficient on your behalf, but don't compromise your feature wall that you're planning on having. And that'll be my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for the package. I'll keep my comments pretty brief. Simple building, not a lot to say about design building materials. I appreciate the red wrapping elements framing the door. That's fairly interesting. Specific to staff's questions, I agree with the previous comments. You could do a bit more with the south wall and don't want to layer a bunch of design expectations on a simple industrial building. So I think you've heard some suggestions on what you can do that are pretty simple around things you're already doing, like planting, or perhaps public art like murals. Those are pretty easy solutions, so I encourage you to work with staff. And then I'm generally okay with the temporary condition on the north property line as long as that's temporary and the intersection with Midway is treated sensitively. That's it for me.
Okay, yeah, my comments are around the ramping. I mean, it would be great to have it reduced slightly because with rain, 8.2% is really tough. Additionally, just traveling from the accessible parking stalls to the northern side of Building A needs to be resolved. So whether or not it's meeting those together, having one, I'm not sure. I'd also encourage you to maybe move the parking spaces in the southwest corner just slightly west, so your access aisle is aligned a bit better. There's no talking it. And this is maybe more of a question to staff, but because accessible parking is now taken care of by municipalities and not the building code, is that having one of these spaces be van accessible. So it's CSA requirements are about 7 millimeters wider than a typical space, so that includes that access aisle, but you might want to consider doing that. She knows what to the west side. That's it.
Just again to encourage that more sort of aesthetic value to the whole property. But again, that south wall, to your point, is that if it's just grass, it'll have to be mowed. But also it can become a dumping ground and a point for criminal activity, so you want to light it properly. And if you paint it or put any kind of aesthetic value on that wall, it gives a private place. So it reduces tagging and things like that, so it keeps the value of the building. So just encouraging that.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a very good proposal, thank you. It's very clear actually, and there's a lot of information here, and which makes it easy for us to read. Probably the application could just benefit with a little more contextual overview information just to see the adjacency, so we could review that a little bit better. And then perhaps comment more about how the floodplain and the grades are changing. But otherwise, I think it's a very good proposal. I agree with all the comments that were made. And probably just one addition, I think of just some design exploration, perhaps in and around, you know, how the building is being announced. You know, is it signage that's within the landscape? Rather than seeing it go on later, it'd probably be good for planning to review just how you propose to address the building to the public, because it's at the end of this cul-de-sac. It'd be interesting, is it on the building or is it in the landscape? Otherwise, it's very good, and I agree with the planning's request to review the south. Those comments have been made. Thank you. That's great.
Just one comment on stormwater management, just to make sure your surface water runoff doesn't go onto neighboring properties, and then review the grades that you don't have. We're trying to reduce it 5% into a loading bay is complicated.
I would echo all the comments so far. With the fence on the north, appreciating that future development is going to be forced to be at the same elevation, but encouraging a thoughtfulness at the midway intersection. The south elevation, I agree with the comments that have been noted thus far. And in addition, as well as with the slopes, I think just as much as possible, reducing those percentages wherever we can, in particular with those routes that we're asking folks to use the ramps. And then with regards to the engineered slopes, I would encourage you to really push the engineers and allow them to allow you to plant some plant species that are meaningful and don't require the maintenance that a lawn planting would have, and offer some habitat opportunities in those areas that would be really helpful.
Yeah, great, thanks. As far as comments from myself, I would just like to say that this area has typically been more of a medium industrial type area, and this actually building fits in fairly well in that picture down there. I find we could obviously always use a little bit more yard for that style, but this is what we have, and I think you've been sensitive to the circulation and whatnot. My only comment would be just to be extra careful of the mix between the industrial users and the public that could be on the site. And I know that you do have walkways that go through there, and it seems to be well thought out. But if it does become congested, or if you do end up with a restaurant down there and something like that, the tenant mix could not work out so well in a tight development like this. So just try to be thoughtful about that as much as possible. And I'll commend you on the style of the building is it lends more to medium industrial with your high 14-foot doors. And the way that you've built this. So I think as far as the aesthetic aspect, probably not as important, at least to me, down in this corner of the business park. And I think you've gone well above and beyond what anyway I would expect. So I'll commend you on that. And that's it for comments from me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Where do we go next? We've got to basically we need a recommendation. And you know what? I did not prepare myself with the options.
Page 16.
It's on 16? Yeah. Okay. That might be in there somewhere. Okay. So, our recommendations, and I'll read them as this is what our previous chair so graciously did for us. Option A is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and does not need to see this project returned for further review. Option B is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve the following recommendations. Option C is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to resolve recommendations and return to present the revised project. And option D is that the advisory design panel does not support the project as presented for the following reasons. And I have a suggestion for an option.
I'll make a motion for B.
For B. Anyone to second it? Okay. And that, so do we go into the comments first, or do we vote for
Usually a discussion while it's on the table.
discussion about the option B and the particular comments that would be connected to it? Shall I just open that up to whoever has any comments?
Yeah, I think there was a couple key ones with the building and the elevations, although the simplicity of the building is appreciated down in this area.
Mhm.
There were some comments from us to look at particular elevations. There's some site plan issues. to look at. What else?
Also contextualizing it within the neighborhood because they're tight areas, as you said, there's a restaurant or anything like that.
If it occurs in that,
Yeah.
in that development. With
Yeah.
the surrounding areas are medium industrial use right now, but
Right.
that may change in the future, so. Yeah, I
That's
think,
the common one about the treatment of the southern wall facade and doing something to soften that a little bit.
mhm, mhm. And to improve the slopes of the ramps,
Yeah.
and the circulation from that aspect.
And particularly like reducing the slope where the accessible parking stalls is just as 5% your chair's gonna roll away.
Okay,
Also not taking the asphalt quite so to the fence line.
okay. Are you okay with
I got all the,
comments that we have? Fantastic. So we will call the question for B. All in favor? Anyone against? It's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone. Our second business arising is business development permit number 501, which is 1360 Victoria Avenue. And I'll just start off by saying that Richard has a conflict, so he will be stepping out. And we will start with Jeff Leonard.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Advisory Design Panel. My name is Jessie Fletcher, planner here at the District of Squamish. Today introducing the project at 1360 Victoria, at the corner of Victoria and 2nd in downtown Squamish. The application is for a 6-story mixed-use building with 32 residential units and 2 stories of commercial comprising 22% of the GFA. It's permitted under the downtown commercial C4 zoning. The proposed development is subject to development permit areas 3 and 5, and the applicant's conformance to the guidelines is outlined in Schedule A of your report today. The applicant is seeking 2 variances at this time. The first to the loading bays. They're proposing 0 loading bays where 2 are required. However, the applicant is proposing that 1 space on street on 2nd be dedicated to loading, and staff think that this is an acceptable solution, but is still under review. The second variance is to section 4.43 of the zoning bylaw, which requires 2 square meters per residential unit of indoor amenity space. Currently, this isn't provided. This project has not previously been presented to Advisory Design Panel, and staff are generally supportive of the site plan and form and character, but are seeking ADP's feedback on a few items. Specifically, we're seeking feedback on the south and east elevations. Development permit area guidelines state that no blank walls are not considered acceptable, and staff are seeking ADP's help in assessing their compliance with this guideline or feedback on how to better align with it. There is a single vehicle driveway to the 2nd-story parkade from the laneway that is managed by convex mirrors. Staff are seeking ADP expertise as to whether or not this is an acceptable solution. There is a small design gap in the awning on 2nd Avenue, which is a nice design feature, but staff are seeking ADP feedback about whether or not that provides adequate pedestrian protection in that location. And then just to note that Victoria Street is currently undergoing a redesign, so what is proposed on the drawings will likely change significantly, but we don't know to what or when we'll know. So if you just treat Victoria like the blank slate on that end, and then what's proposed on 2nd can come to that system. But I'll pass it over to the applicants now.
I'll just introduce myself and our team. My name is Jane Song from AKA Architecture and Design. I'm here with Luke Tyson from my office and Tom Barratt from the Landscape Architecture office. So the project we're presenting today, we feel is becoming somewhat typical in the downtown area, a 6-story mixed-use building. We have 2 levels of parking at levels 1 and 2, and residential units from levels 3 to 6. So I think you'll notice around town that a lot of these buildings are under construction now. Just to introduce a little bit of the context around the site, there is kind of a mixed bag of buildings kind of directly adjacent to this project. There's a mix of, say, 4-story, 6-story, single-story buildings. So this is our site, currently a parking lot. There's a new development with a development permit directly across the street. That's this development right here. It's in for building permit right now. And aside from that, there's the close proximity to the park, as well as, it's hard to see here, directly adjacent, there's some low existing buildings, single story. One thing to note is that, Cleveland Avenue, as we know, is the main downtown street, but they are encouraging commercial use along, and commercial use and storefronts along both Victoria and 2nd Avenue. So we just developed a few 3D diagrammatic drawings just to illustrate some of our logic for coming up with the design. So the first diagram basically just shows the setbacks and the volumetric requirements that we needed to adhere to. Most of them are fairly typical, the rear setback along the laneway. One thing that we also needed to respond to was the BC Hydro overhead. There's some overhead lines there and they need a setback as well. We talked to BC Hydro and they're unable to relocate those overhead lines along 2nd. Diagram 2, one thing we wanted to try to do was, define some of the entries for the building, so you can see a few indentations there. And aside from that, diagram 3 just shows how we're trying to step down towards the adjacent buildings. So along here, this is where the 4-story cornerstone building is, and on this side, that's where the single-story little hostel is located at the moment. So you'll see, basically the strategy for this project was to try to define and break down the massing through these strong volumes. So we split the massing up into what we consider pretty strong shapes that are each defined separately, but still kind of create a cohesive whole across the block. Some of the precedents we looked at to try to help us define this language we were hoping to achieve, just to keep the volumes very simple, kind of understated, but to have kind of a strong presence on the street as well. So some sample projects. And here's where we arrived. So this just gives you an example or an idea of how we picture it to work on the street. This is the Victoria Street elevation, so you can kind of see, we modeled in the cornerstone office building, so you can see how we sort of step that volume down a bit to meet it at the 4-story level. It's harder to see along the corner here, but we have this, we use that BC Hydro overhead setback requirement to create kind of this lower section that would relate to the street a bit better along 2nd, and then also kind of stepping down to the adjacent building that exists on that property. And then we have the laneway side, which again shows how there's this lower portion directly adjacent to that existing building. So some of the other features that determine this design, we were trying to keep the facades quite simple, and one thing we did here, we tried to absorb the balconies into the language of the design rather than protruding outwards and having the railings be quite defined on the street. Here we're trying to integrate that balcony into the design so that it all kind of leads as part of the volume itself, and we liked how it was creating some, not darker, but some kind of contrasting shadow lines, etc. We also think that sets it up quite well for step 3 of the energy code that we will be meeting. We've also created drop soffits over the decks because we feel we'd be able to incorporate a lot of the venting caps and through the soffits rather than having them all kind of lined up on the exterior facade of the building. We're really hoping that we can eliminate as much of that clutter as possible. Going back, this next sheet just shows the streetscape. So as I mentioned, the District of Squamish is promoting commercial storefronts along both of these street faces. So we really were trying at this, for this project, to try to sort of maximize the transparency of the commercial storefronts. So we are going, rather than having a typical signage band at the top of the storefront, we're proposing these perpendicular signs, and as well as, you'll see later on there's a signage plan, but we thought maybe in this case having some decals directly applied to the glass might add a little more animation and be quite subtle, but yet maintain that feeling of openness along the street. This corner, I forgot to mention, is also identified as a small corner plaza in one of the DP area guidelines for downtown. So that's another reason why we kind of cut back that corner. We're trying to animate it and keep it as open as possible without sacrificing too much commercial space, which we realize is at a premium as well. The site plan, and I think Jesse talked about this. This is our, okay, maybe I'll just start. Just pointing at the commercial spaces, that wrap along Victoria and Second. One of the concerns that Jesse mentioned was the extent of the canopy, so I just want to point that out to you. The canopy starts at this, I don't know if you can see where it starts here, wraps around the corner and ends short of the property line to the south. So the gaps she's talking about are kind of at this corner and at this upper corner here. So we kind of feel, the way that the canopies work right now, they are directly related to the commercial space and the residential lobbies. And so where it's transitioning to the adjacent projects, we've basically cut it back. So that's something that we feel sort of emphasizes the public parts of the building, and then kind of just warns people that the next building is coming up. Definitely open to feedback there. This is, common features for the projects here, the garbage room, our parkade is entered through the laneway. So we have ground level parking here. And then we have, we've referred to the Vancouver bylaw to determine the use of a one-way parkade ramp. So in the city of Vancouver bylaws what's it, I don't know if there's
19 and lower.
Right. So if there's 19 or fewer spaces on the second floor, then you are permitted to have a one-way ramp. And we thought we wanted to explore this for this project because it really gives more area over to the commercial spaces and to the office spaces above. We really feel that by, just by gaining a little bit of extra space for the office and commercial, that it makes it actually quite a bit more usable, and that the occupant load on the second floor is basically all residential, and rather than the 19 unit cap, I think we have 14 spaces on the second floor, so we consider that within the buffer that City of Vancouver suggests is appropriate. Is there anything else in the site plan? Aside from that, we have an outdoor usable space. at level 3. I'll let Tom speak to the features of that space. I'm just going to fly through the rest of the plans. Here are the elevations. The elevations just kind of show you how the volumes taper. So we kind of were playing around with those parapet heights, sloping upwards towards some of the mountain views, sloping downwards towards some of the lower buildings, and just kind of having a bit of its own language, and we think kind of relating to the mountainscapes in the distance. So you can see this is right in here is the 6-story building plan for directly across the street. This project faces the Cornerstone office building across the laneway. So you can see a little context there. Oh. Right. And these are the elevations that Jesse has identified as being fairly blank. So again, we feel that there's enough articulation through the change in volume and massing through there, and that rather than being blank, they are articulated through fenestration, etc. And just the textures, because we really wanted the focus to be on the volumes, and we're trying to, I think it's a balance between trying to create something quite uncluttered and understated versus something that maybe is too blank. There's a kind of a fine line we like to straddle. The materials, we have brought a materials palette with us. I don't know if you want to pass it around. Again, in keeping with just the overall strategy for this project, we're just trying to keep it as understated as possible. So our color palette is fairly neutral. We're just basically trying to, to express it through the differentiation in texture and quite a neutral palette. One thing that we also want to talk about, those are Trespa, the Trespa plank product. So they're applied as lap siding. We are not able to use wood siding on this project because it's a 6-story wood frame. We're bound to use only non-combustible cladding product. So we're really trying to figure out the best option. So that's our kind of our favorite palette so far, but we're also looking at maybe adding a bit more texture through. We've used like a hardy shingle on some other projects. It just kind of creates still some texture, but a little bit less, or still a little bit of the wood grain finish, but not quite as pronounced as in the Trespa product. So that's something that we're trying to do on all of our projects is to try to use or to create this use this wood that's Squamish is known for, but not being able to use wood is kind of a challenge. And aside from that, I lost track of time, so maybe yeah. Sorry. It's just our signage plan, just to show the intentions there, a little more detail about how we want to express some of the uses at the commercial level. Okay, that might be hard. Can you have that Oh, there we go. Yes. There you go.
The issue on East Street, 2nd and Victoria, and we worked on the apartment building across the street some years ago, is having planting on the street. And in this case, working with Jane and the setbacks is fairly substantial. Planting along the road, so we have a situation where you have planting blocks, parking, etc. And it's a tough sort of situation for plants. You would think it'd be benign relative to what I'm used to in Whistler and such. But the best example I could look at is in Green Drive in North Vancouver. They would sort of take a walk down there and look at the planters, take pictures. We can go on Google. You start to see what's working and what's not working. And what you see is plants like the lavender, the grasses, perennials are working quite well down there. When you get into too many shrubs or isolated shrubs like blue pines and this and that, they start to tend to fail. So our emphasis is sort of a very colorful landscape of lavender, grasses, perennials, but still taking efforts to have evergreen, sarcopa, planting, etc., further into the planter and away from the herbs. And a strong street tree language that the Squamish is interesting. They have specific trees for each street. The Katsura tree along Victoria. You can't put the one they specified anywhere under power lines, so we have a smaller tree on the 2nd Avenue. So that, and now in this area, right up against the building, against the commercial, where you see these triangular type of planting, we wanted to have planting mixed with seeding and not wanting to use concrete planters to take up so much space. So we're using a steel planter that's custom made, be 18 inches high, wood seeding built right into the steel. But we're using it, experimenting with it down at the Soko project with some success. So I think it'll blend with the building, give sort of some industrial height, but be a very kind of unique sort of pattern that the planters and the differences in the paving will kind of accent the planting, if that makes sense. So the actual concrete patterns and differences of in the sidewalk according to the Squamish guidelines with our own kind of, as you get closer to the building, enhancement with paving and planters. You move on this one. Oh, you just dial. So the level up, the amenity space, we have two types of planting. Against the building is a sort of typical planter, 18 inches high, concrete against where the units are. That gives us enough volume to be adequate screening to the units. And then we're screening to the seating area, the amenity, the barbecue, the tables, the chairs. On the perimeter is a different product. It's actually a green roof product that is 8 inches of volume of planting, and the images that you see are that product being used. And the center image has the aluminum edge that holds it. So it's a very kind of efficient, low weight, yet gives you planting that's of sufficient height that you'll see from the building. Jane and Lou keep putting big plants on these second and third levels, so we can achieve that look with this product without overbearing the building, etc. And then we're doing that on a level up, so that the elevation of the building will have this repeated tall grasses, mid-sized shrub kind of look. Here's some details of it, of the live roof, not live roof, the green roof product. It has the irrigation, has an irrigation system, it has the edging, it has the height, and then just the other tree root and then the bench that the Squamish makes in the park here for the street. Yeah, that has it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I imagine we'll move right into questions at this point. Jenna, are you ready on your side?
Sure. Okay. I was wondering if you could speak to the variance with regards to the 2 square meters of the indoor amenity space and where that limitation is coming from.
It's something that we wanted to review with planning just because our understanding had been that because it's a fairly new policy, I think it was adopted in November 2018.
August.
August? Oh, was it? Yeah. Okay, so we had been told that based on UDI recommendations that policies would be enforced based on the pre-application date. So our pre-application date predated the implementation of that policy. So, we have internally talked about, whether one of those upper floor units could have a portion of it dedicated to an amenity use, an indoor amenity use, but we didn't want to go down that route without verifying first that it was a requirement, because whatever we do, we want to make sure that it's actually usable and not just kind of thrown in there because it's a requirement. So we definitely were prepared for the outdoor amenity space and that use on a level 3, and we put a degree of commitment towards that, and we just want to make sure that that policy is actually
fair enough. On the corner, the main corner of the building where we have the charcoal colored wall, the windows have this patterning effect. And I just was curious if you could speak to your design idea about the rhythm of that layout of the windows.
It's one of those things where, according to the DP guidelines, we are meant to create some visual interest along the streetscape.
Yeah.
And this is a thing with these 6-story buildings or these taller buildings that are happening. They do stack quite a bit. So these units still stack, which is an efficient way of building wood frame. But we figured out, if we can extend the structure beyond the size of the window, so the structure still stacks, but the window can kind of vary within that structure. So that's one device we used, and then the other was, that it appears like it doesn't stack, but it does.
Yeah.
The balconies are little alcoves, they all stack, but we kind of varied that language to make it appear a little more varied than it actually is. So there is definitely some flexibility within that, and as an office, we're like, how random is too random?
Yeah.
This is, some of us want it to be more symmetrical, and other ones are, So anyway, we arrived at this place where we felt it's kind of playful, it's animated, but it's also, it doesn't detract from this simplicity of the overall design that we're trying to achieve. So, and then also, the spare use of materials that was important to the overall. So,
I was hoping you could speak to the materials on the roof decks themselves in terms of their SRI values, and on the areas that are not going to be occupied, particularly the very top of the building. While it's not a LEED building, I was just wondering if there was consideration to a roof material that would help facilitate a more sustainable approach to
on the uppermost roof. We are just right now exploring the Step 3 energy requirements as a starting point. So a lot of what we've done is try to make that the whole envelope as efficient, with the, keeping everything as stacked. I don't know that we've looked, have you guys looked at different roof assemblies yet for the?
No, really not.
No? Well, the way that it is set up right now, because all of the volumes are defined by parapets, so it looks more complicated than it is. It's actually a flat roof with a sloping parapet all around each volume. So what that does give us is a flexibility then to absorb any extra thicknesses in the roof. So we have some flexibility, as you say, to adapt to whatever assembly requirements we do need there.
Good. And then just with regards to level 6, I was hoping you could speak to the roofs there. Currently there isn't programming shown on those decks, and just sort of the rationale for that level. Is it level 2 that has all the programming, and then level 6 is so these are private roof decks for the units, is that correct?
Yeah, mostly they are.
Yeah, most of the a lot of these are resulting from the mass stepping back from the other areas. And
Yeah.
there's definitely opportunity to be able to include more open space, I think, in certain aspects. The mass was kind of stepped back from the cornerstone development and away from the park to really try and articulate those volumes and then allow that.
So we do have some leftover roof here. It wouldn't be for, the use of all the residents. It would be for private deck use. But, I think we're trying to arrive at a place where, maybe parts of it are accessible, but there may be sections that are just roof. Yeah, so we haven't defined that as much. I think what we've shown is what we need to capture the massing that we designed.
Perfect, thank you.
Just a question for planning. On the southern one, is there a height restriction in around 4 stories, or is it similar to 6, do you think?
Similar to 6.
And the other just general question, I think, was can you get away with a 12-foot wide rail?
A 12-foot, sorry?
12-foot wide rail, can you get away with that?
Well, that is what we were talking about as a reference to the City of Vancouver bylaw, that in certain instances, and I think that I did attach.
It's usually 15 stalls, but yeah.
Yeah, and then because it's single use, like just residential use, there's no guest parking or commercial parking, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's sort of stuff in transportation, your engineering department would comment on, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the plaza area, the street level, how are you planning that? Is that going to be public space to use, or is that going to be storefront space where they kind of go out into a cafe?
I don't think it's large enough to be, and in the, is it the downtown open spaces plan, something like that. It's not identified as a major plaza, it's identified as one of the smaller corner plazas.
Fair enough.
So yeah, we have given it some extra room, and we wanted to define it for use by whoever ends up occupying that corner unit, because we do feel like there's value to them being able to spill out and occupy and animate that space. One of the things, if you go down 2nd Avenue right now, it's not really like a bustling commercial street, so I think anything we can do that can pull, some pedestrians towards that direction, that was sort of the goal.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can allow that space to be animated publicly and again through art and using green as art, and other materials, that would be great. And then opening it up to having artists create small, even aesthetic pieces that can be included in the landscape of that spot. The other question I have is just in terms of your parking, your public parking spots and your public bike spaces, are you going to have any electric charging stations for
those
the bike?
those green spaces there, those are all going to be charged.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's a number of them on that level, and then almost an equal number for the residents above.
And even the bikes too? Will you have charging stations for the?
We never actually talked about that.
Just wondering.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then again, your laneway, just making it more sort of public versus an opportunity for dumping and less savory activity.
Yeah, right.
Just a thought.
Right.
Just wondering if you're going to consider that. Okay.
I have one question that's more of curiosity than anything else. In Unit G, it seems that you have, are you proposing to have a movable wall that would go around the bed and stuff? Or is that it's just sort of...
It's a
place saving?
It's a possibility. Yeah, we have seen that in other projects. So it's actually a studio unit that could have movable partitions.
Just out of curiosity. I think that's all my questions. There's comments.
thanks. Just interested in exploring kind of how the building hits the ground in the public realm. So if you just, you mentioned it in your presentation, but if you could just talk a bit more about your design decisions around that weather protection, not just about staff's concerns about those gaps in the edges, but how it jogs and those trade-offs between what you mentioned, the commercial space and the public realm.
Sorry, I don't know if I understand the last part of your question, the trade-offs between...
Right, so you mentioned that it kind of jogs and articulates and really follows kind of the outline of your patio in the commercial space, but so I get why you would do that, but I'm interested in
the shape of it.
And well, how it serves people who aren't on the patio and people who are walking down the street and they have continuous weather protection. So
well,
I'm making that assumption, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, one thing that may not be clear in the site plan is that along 2nd Avenue, the building above actually projects over that open space. So
It's cantilever.
Over
Yeah,
the plaza, I get that, but I'm talking about the sidewalk where people are walking. Just looking at your renderings on page 6 and your site plan, and your landscape. There, so if you just look at that, so okay, it covers your private patio for the cafe. So that's great for if you've bought a coffee and you're sitting on there.
Yeah.
But what about those people who are walking down the street and aren't buying coffee and so nothing?
The canopy does project over the sidewalk. I don't know if it's...
Okay, maybe it's just not.
Yeah, maybe it's not
like a
super...
dashed line.
Yeah, let's just see.
The
I can
grey
see
area
it.
itself kind of aligns with the building cantilever, so I think the cantilever is about 5 foot, and the canopy actually protrudes about past that
I don't know
line.
if you can see this.
I can see it a bit on the landscape plan, but I guess also that is it sort of so it seems continuous on the
Yes, yeah.
second,
Yeah.
and then Victoria it kind of does that
That's
jog,
right,
and
yeah.
there's the gap.
So yeah, it projects into the public right of way. Now it's a little bit tricky along Victoria because what we've shown, like Jesse mentioned, that whole streetscape's under review. We've shown kind of best case scenario for our purposes and in regards to where the curb line is and how much planting area we would have. We're not sure if we're gonna get that, but the canopy does come to about here. We could project it further, but one thing we're trying to do is to create a lightness to the feeling of that canopy. So we're trying to keep that edge very thin. So there's kind of a balance between the look we're trying to achieve and the amount of cantilever we can achieve. So I think we're being quite...
So I'm less concerned about that Victoria side. It's the second street side where it kind of jogs and goes in and out. So if we're thinking about continuous weather protection, somebody going along that edge, there's a bunch of gaps both at the southern property line and then where your arrow is there as well. So that's just purely like a design kind of aesthetic decision, or?
So far it has been. One thing that we played around with was the the sloping parapets and stuff. We really wanted to kind of make the whole building a bit more tapered, but we're trying to be efficient as well. So that's kind of a carryover from our initial thoughts of wanting to really have some playful angles and things like that. But your point is understood that we probably could accommodate that little take that notch out and make it more continuous there without compromising the thickness of that canopy that we're trying to achieve.
Okay, and then just one more quick one that came out in the other comments. You mentioned the corner plaza and no room to be able to achieve anything there. We're trying to achieve that in the private space, so I just want to understand that because the guidelines talk about achieving a corner plaza, which I don't see. So are you saying you're trading that off for private space?
Sorry, the project is allowed to have 0 property line, so we could have built out to this corner.
Yeah.
But because of the corner plaza location, we did want to open that corner up, and we thought that it was easy to envision whatever occupies that corner space being able to utilize that area for their own purposes. That's why we suggested some bistro type tables there, and Jessie and I were talking, she would like to see potentially some more benches and things like that. So we do have a little bit of that, like this is a a bench
Is
here.
there any built-in benches?
Yeah, this is a built-in bench here as well as here.
And
But
down here, down,
yeah, down
down
right
there
here.
as well. So
Yeah,
there's
so-
3 full benches there.
So, sorry,
On private space.
yes, on the private space. So it's kind of a balance between, trying to indicate through landscaping and design that this is a special space, but trying to keep it also open for use of the future tenants, because that could be valuable for them to be able to bring
Yeah,
business
I
their way.
appreciate your pulling back and offering that. That's great. I just imagine in the future, a tenant fencing that off and it not being public space, right? So that's just what I'm trying to explore. But thank you, that's my comments. Or questions.
Good. The planters, Tom, at the street level are flush with the patio. It's only the ones on the private property that are raised?
That's exactly right.
Okay. How do you envision people from some of those parking stalls that are 100% planting getting from the passenger side to the sidewalk?
There's an 18-inch, well, first of all, it's set up, actually I looked again to the District of North Vancouver guidelines, how they open the cars and how they, a lot of thought into that, so we basically are utilizing that. And then there's an 18-inch gap through a curb.
On Second, but not on
Yeah.
Victoria? But maybe that's...
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Well, Victoria will be something else.
Okay, okay. Level 6 planting, why what you have where you have it? Like, why not elsewhere? What's special? Why that spot? Because there's so much area on level 6. And I think there was kind of a similar question, but I don't know that I got an answer that I understood.
I think it's part of the building elevation and the sequence of planting that you would see from below.
Isn't that it's an adjacent property, right? So it's not a street frontage or even a laneway.
Well, it's an extra feature that the
Okay.
people within the units look out and in the elevation of the building. So it fills in some, almost like leftover space
Yeah.
that we can add some greenery to this.
Okay.
So that's about it.
The one-way ramp, is there a operation light, like the single-lane bridge to La Seminole, or something like that? Because you're talking around a corner, up a ramp, somebody's going to be halfway.
We didn't include it in our drawings because according to the bylaw, I keep talking about the Vancouver one, but they do suggest that concave mirror. And so internally we have been talking about, could there be a light at the top of the ramp and one at the bottom that just suggests when the ramp is in use.
Okay.
But we're kind of looking for more direction on that as well.
Okay. And I assume Richard's part of the project since he stepped away, and I'll ask his question. So vehicle maneuvering, have you, or if he's not your consultant, have you guys studied vehicle maneuvers? I'm not seeing anything on the plans here.
What we've done so far is just meeting the radii that's suggested, and we know that, like for example, it's a 12-foot ramp, but it widens at the top and it bulges at the turning spot, so that it's wider in the where you're turning. So it's not a consistent 12-foot width all the way up to the top. We're bulging it in the places where it's recommended to.
Okay, that's visible. Down at the bottom is where, that somebody's waiting for the person to come down, they're blocking the alley, and the maneuvering looks very constrained there. Has anybody looked at that? I guess that's my question.
No, I think that given the occupant load, we haven't looked at, how much traffic would be interfering with each other through that laneway.
Okay. And then sticking with Richard's favorite subjects, so getting in and out of the parking spaces, those last stalls have no extra aisle length to produce a three-point turn. And the aisle actually is quite narrow, so it's not an over-wide aisle to allow you to do the maneuver.
Turn. Are you at the top?
Yeah, and any of the two parking lots, the last two stalls are tight to the end of
Yeah.
the drive aisle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think realistically you would be reversing into those stalls to get out easily.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what we've done here is using for the planning level 2 parking is using the district of Squamish dimensions for drive aisle, for parking spaces, for a distance between the edge of parking space to an adjacent structure.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if those address kind of that maneuver of getting out of that last stall.
Right.
They should if they don't. Okay. The residential entry, can you describe it to me, like your diagram, which was beautiful, talked about pushing and pulling and how you came apart or came around to this overall design, but I'm losing the front door quality of the residential component.
So the front door to the project is actually also the access to the second floor office space, so it kind of does both. So it's kind of hard to define it as just a residential lobby. So it's accessed off of 2nd Ave. Let me just see if the elevation.
Just in elevation, I'm not seeing that it's got that kind of front door presence. And so I just wanted you to kind of explain that, your rationale on that.
It's kind of hard to see in this elevation actually, but so that this section here is where the circulation to above basically is, the stairwell and everything.
And is that glazing behind that element?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's a stair tower behind that, behind these wooden slabs.
Yeah.
Which continues down to the street and then travels across at the street level and under that thin canopy. And then you can kind of see the signage. We basically were trying to define that entry through the slats, which doesn't occur elsewhere, and plus some signage right at the street level. So it's meant to kind of serve as, like I said, the offices and the residential.
Good. Okay, I understand that better. Thank you. And so that opens up the next question: is the egress of that stair with that much glazing in it, is that achievable?
Much glazing in it? Yeah, from what I understand, the only place where we would need the fire rated separation is between the. Yeah, it's just around the.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. That's my question.
Could I just quickly ask staff a question? Did you mention something about you were wanting recommendations on light wells?
I'm sorry?
Did you say something about light wells? Or did I pick up that wrong?
What were the recommendations you were looking for?
We were looking for feedback on the south and east elevations and on the drive aisle for the second story.
Okay, sorry. Well then that explains that. Cool. Could I ask, on page 13, there's a marked area that says rooftop, proposed location for rooftop units, shown dotted. Is that for, on our package we have.
It might have been it. Oh, sorry, I think it got eliminated by accident. So one of the comments that we had back from planning was about where will the rooftop units be screened from the street level. So we just suggested we don't have the size of the makeup air units or anything like that, but we know that they'll likely be servicing the corridors and will be situated probably like in the center of the roof. So we think quite well back of the parapets.
Okay. Okay. And staying on the roof, on our plan, we've got are there rainwater leaders going down in the center of the roof?
Yeah, we're at the DP stage, so this is how we've solved it in other projects, is to have the drainage away from the parapets into the center, and then we kind of bring it down the center of like partition walls down through the building.
Okay. Garbage.
Garbage.
Could you describe to me how I take my garbage out of one of these units into the garbage.
Yeah,
building.
that's something that we've actually been talking about, and it's kind of under review. You know, typically for these projects that we've done in downtown Squamish, and I think Squamish itself is moving towards, for all of their multifamily, kind of a centralized garbage room, even for townhomes and things like that. So it's a different arrangement than most people are kind of accustomed to. But you would probably need to take your garbage down through the elevator.
So no garbage chutes?
But I guess my question is, from living in Vancouver, I'm used to this, but it's usually within, I don't have to walk out of the vestibule, round a cafe, across 4 commercial units and into a street access door.
Right, yeah, and we did talk about how maybe it would be more appropriate to come out your stairwell and directly into a door here, and kind of, you know, right now we gave the priority to the commercial occupants, and really what probably should do is the reverse and move the door, the man door, to this side to make it more convenient for the residents. So that's something we.
Okay. Laneway, the commercial building has full height glazing. Was there any consideration given to sort of exterior shading on some of the bedroom units that face directly into those fully glazed office spaces?
You know, we never really considered that at this point. The facade that's facing the
west elevation.
So a lot of those units a lot of those windows are bedrooms.
Oh, sorry, the residential.
Yeah, the residential. So these ones facing.
Yeah, I mean, if there was consideration given to an extended kind of window flange, like a trim detail around it, of boxing that out and that becoming part of the shading device.
But you're concerned more about privacy.
Yeah, I just see lots of other really nice shading elements around the building, and then on a face which has 10 bedrooms facing into full height glazed offices, there's a blank face there.
Yeah. You know, when we look at that laneway facade, we did try to direct as many bedroom windows in the other direction. So there are still a few that have bedrooms facing the laneway, but wherever possible, we tried to have a second window that wasn't facing in that direction. But your point is taken. I think that, you know, the difference is that office building is mostly occupied during the day, and that you might still have privacy during the off hours.
Yeah.
But as I said,
I noticed you have Class A bike spaces inside each unit. Is that a requirement by the zoning, or?
so I think the way that the zoning works, for every residential unit, you need to provide 2 Class A spots. So you can provide half of them within a unit and half of them in a separate bike room. So that's sort of how our numbers work at the moment. I think every unit probably could accommodate 2 bikes, but planning has informed us that only one is that. This is, I don't know.
I just noticed that there's a bike room downstairs.
Yes.
So does that doesn't cover all the numbers that you need?
No, it's not. Maybe it's not official planning policy, but I've been told you can have half of the required numbers within a bike room, and then 1 bike per unit stored within a unit to meet your total required numbers.
Okay. Well, I went biking this morning, and I wouldn't have liked to bring my bike back into an apartment unit this morning.
Yeah.
It was just covered.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would work from a usability. The strata may, you know, ban people from bringing bikes up elevators. That's what happened in a building.
There is option, I think, within this scheme to have both. The bike room can easily accommodate double stacked racks. And then I know, speaking to someone from around here who bikes in Squamish, like, I don't want to leave my bike in a bike room. I want to take it upstairs to my house where I live, and I think a lot of people would say that as well.
Yeah.
So giving people the option, I think, is a good one.
Have you considered bike boxes?
Like the cages.
Well, they're called
They're
bike boxes.
stored outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they're locked, and they're, you know, it's like having your own personal lock support.
Yeah.
Almost done. And the swing of the door from CRU 04, is that allowable onto a pedestrian guard there? Just down there. The southwest commercial unit, the door swings out.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
I'm not sure actually. Yeah, we would need to double check that.
Okay. Yeah, I just imagine walking down there and seeing maybe it's just me, but the amenity space on the 3rd floor. Is there any landscaping proposed to protect Suite G? And then follow-up question, isn't that a perfect location for an amenity space?
Like an indoor amenity space?
Yeah.
That's something that we've actually considered internally.
We would need to speak to our client also
Yeah.
to find out.
Otherwise, my comment would just be, everyone using that open space has to walk past the studio, the window of Suite G. And then last question was there any other colors thought about for the black? Did you do any studies of different?
We've actually played around with. So we have those 3 colors: the white, the black, and every volume is taken a turn being wood, being white, being, just kind of alternating between those 3 volumes. And this is sort of where we arrived because we like that contrast the most between the dark wood and the wood. And so where we've varied the facade the most is on that corner volume. And using those alcoves to really express wood as much as possible. That's kind of where we feel like it had the most impactful presence on the street. But again, we did go in circles a few times before agreeing.
Yep. Thanks.
I think most of my questions have been answered. I'm curious, is there any reason why you could not have rear entries into the CRUs on the main floor? Which would give access to the garbage and the back side, on that level.
The reason we don't have rear entries, and it is a problem for most of the projects we do in downtown Squamish, is just trying to maximize the amount of parking spaces. So is that what you mean? Like it would be back here, so we'd have to add a walk aisle there that would kind of impinge on the parking. So it is kind of a very delicate fine balance between maximizing parking without sacrificing commercial space, and then also guessing at what kind of uses will be in those commercial spaces.
I'd suggest that 90% of users would find it relatively critical to be getting in and out of the rear of the units, and especially for garbage and storage and other deliveries, business hours. That's not a question, so. Was there any consideration of the inevitable 0 setback building that would be on the south side? Eventually, one day?
Eventually, is there any consideration to what might happen there?
Yeah, given that you've got a patio and lots of glass and...
I think that the only, the consideration is we felt that is still a south-facing patio, so we would still get some light regardless of what happens there in the future, and we would still have views across the laneway side. But aside from that, we do realize that it is not, in the future it's going to be quite more urban, and that an infill project is likely to occur, and I think that would be obviously disclosed to any future residents.
Any other last minute questions?
Just on the garbage point, since we're now moving beyond the 3- and 4-story buildings in downtown Squamish, was there consideration to garbage chutes? Because carrying garbage on an elevator up and down is not the most pleasing
Right.
element.
Yeah.
And you know, if you're on the 6th floor carrying garbage down an elevator, it's not.
You know, we haven't actually looked at that.
Yeah,
So,
consideration,
yeah.
given the height. And
We were just sometimes it's a fire separation issue.
Yeah,
Also,
I know it wouldn't have worked on some of our more complex projects that have like, you know, enhanced fire separations and things like that, but I don't know, but this one is just one building, so
Yeah.
And now with waste management, you know, separation, I mean, you're
Yeah,
gonna
right.
drop a little bag of garbage down, then you have to take your 10 other bags of recycling down.
Compost.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, then imagine we'll move next to comments.
Well, thank you for your presentation. It was really great to see. It's a good project overall. I really appreciate the contextual understanding of the buildings adjacent to the project. It's really helpful to be reminded of those synergies and relationships. I really like the massing and the articulation in the materials. I think you found a fun, playful way to make the building have some movement and character on that corner. Equally, the signage, just the simple act of turning it at 90 degrees just creates a nice new approach to that. I really like the inset balconies. I think given the amount of rain in this region, it's really nice to have a usable space that's outdoor, that's adjacent to your building. So I think that's a good approach. In terms of the plaza down at the public, I echo some of the comments that were made about just ensuring that there's still publicness about it and it's not in the future subject to being limited to those that are just using that cafe. And at the corner of that plaza, I do appreciate the approach of having those raised planters. Very often there's plants just on the ground plane and they're just subject to they're just trashed just because of the nature of movement. So that was good. I do like the surface treatment of the charcoal concrete, and I would encourage even potentially adding more of that, of the banding. It adds a nice richness to the ground plane. In terms of the live roof, it's nice to see the 8-inch. That's going to offer some good plant growth. And as you continue to develop the plant list, I would encourage you, assuming you're working with gnats or something similar, to just have some good pollinator plants embedded within that plant palette. The level 3 shared amenity space, I would definitely encourage some canopies in that area to make it a bit more multi-seasonal. And if possible, some more planting. There's quite a large area that's not currently programmed, so whether there could be a tree or some more plants or something to just help soften it up, it'd be worthwhile exploring that one on level 3. Level 6, I definitely encourage another look at that, seeing if there is an opportunity to program those spaces more, add more plants to help soften it, canopies if possible, understanding that you're still kind of working through some stuff up there, but it'd be good to take a look. Definitely encourage a continued investigation with that one-way ramp, seeing if those lights are possible with that tight turn. I could see some challenges with people going up and down on that ramp. In terms of the bikes, I definitely would encourage maximizing how many can fit in that interior shared space. Like as you mentioned, you could double them up, and that's great, and appreciating that there are people who will not want to put their fancy mountain bikes in a shared common space, but at least then there just lends a little bit more opportunity. And it is Squamish, so most people have a lot more than one bike anyway. So the more you can fit into that building, the better, for sure. And echoing some comments that I'm expecting, or some of the questions that came up with regards to the garbage, I definitely agree to some of those, and I would encourage another layer of investigation. Is there an opportunity to pair the garbage with the elevator shaft as an example, just to ensure a bit more of a synergy between that. I certainly wouldn't want to go down 6 flights of stairs with a bunch of recycling. So, but overall, I think it's really successful. Thank you.
Yeah, I like the project as well. I think it's got a nice sense of energy. And we need to find the person who decided that hydro telephone poles, or whoever invented those, should be
Shock them.
Mr. Hydro or Mr. Telus.
I appreciate that they included them in the
That's very, it's very real. And I think
It's a great telephone pole.
Can we turn it into art?
The building is very, I think to that point though, having said that, the building is very true to what it is, and you know, the telephone poles are too. So what's really neat about it is that I think the way you explain it is very good. You're talking about how your shape and your form is trying to respond, and it's breaking the building down. That all makes sense. And I like the articulation of it, and I love the simplicity. At the same time, I like there's a playful nature and how it meets the block and how it meets the corner. And I think my comments are really, there's only 3, I think, that I'll try to communicate is that it's really, you know, I think you've got your form. It breaks down, and I know it's no pun intended, but it breaks down, maybe doing the opposite that you want, specifically at the, again, off of the streetscape. You can see it on the right image. And I'm thinking it's just doing too much by having these vertical wood, you know, 5-story elements. I really don't think you need to do all of that. It's probably being too aggressive at that point. And it's almost like your parapets, the white facade on the extreme right of the right image, maybe it's going the wrong way. Maybe it wants to sculpt down, but I think in and around that, I think it's certainly been well handled. I think the form looks really great. Then the comment only wraps into the corner when you get into the lane and how it responds to the Cornerstone building. And what I remember from Cornerstone, it actually does does turn the corner quite successfully, and it does have a glazed element. And I'm wondering if some more design consideration could be thought about on the bottom left image. Is that perhaps it's not as mundane as that? Maybe it's got a little more playfulness to it, especially if I have to go and put my garbage out there. No? That would be one consideration, and I think the last bit would be just we're a transition building, no question. And you know, we're a podium building, no question, because the parking is forced up. And I'm only a little worried about, I think where David's comments are probably going to go, you know, around, you know, the usability, livability, and of that courtyard. Is it getting covered up? Is it actually going to be a useful space? It's going to be dark, I'm worried, and all of those things. And I'm not too sure, and I'm wondering. As a comment, I would say maybe we should explore that, and maybe that could be satisfied with a massing diagram that could go to planning, just to prove out how that courtyard could be quite special on the south side, rather than end up being just a large, overlooked, narrow space. Maybe there's just some urban confirmation that could happen, as if you pretended you were the architects on the south side, and what would you do to make sure it works? And then to maybe respond to planning's comment about the lane. Yes, I would consider another lighter approach to the laneway, and I would certainly maybe try to lighten up the courtyard side, because it certainly looks playful, wants to be playful, but it's maybe a little mundane. But otherwise, I do have concerns about the parking. Just in general, like narrow ramps. Not that I don't like the idea of doing all of that. It does set precedents, I find, and they got away with 12 feet. Well, I'm going to get away with 10 feet, sort of thing. And I think we need to stick to a bylaw and sort of respect what it says. If not, then prove it out, and then present that back. Otherwise, I think it's a smart-looking building. I certainly look forward to probably. I think if we can discuss a little bit here in this discussion, but I think there's just a little bit of form sculpting that could happen just to soften it a little bit. But otherwise, I like the corner treatment. So I think that my last comment is really maybe just another level of softening in and around the remaining part of the building, and that's outside of the corner. So, otherwise, thank you very much.
Just want to say thank you very much for considering architecture as a public art form, because it is very visually appealing, and I think that this will set a nice standard for 2nd Avenue, for anything else that comes along on 2nd Avenue, and make it another street-friendly site. I like all the modulation, and yes, maybe a little bit of softening here and there could come into play, but I very much like the colors and the fact that you've got wood exposure within the balconies. Just a little, again, to echo that point about the that corner that is public space, and that it remain public space, and that it not be just assumed into a commercial operation, that somehow you create an actual public space. And that laneway, lighting it up in terms of laneway art possibly, either applied to the building or some other, green space or something to keep it so that it's, people have pride of place and it doesn't become a dumping ground and a place again for dark activity, that it can be kept as a beautiful public space, because there's, you're sharing it with another building that's also very nicely designed too. And the only other comment was noticed you included motorcycle spaces in there, also electrifying that, or providing some sort of electric space on that.
Okay, my comments are going to be, to start with the accessible parking way. Recognizing that you can't move that hydro box, I think that you'd have to paint some access, like some warning lines on the pavement and wrap around that, and then possibly do a pathway through the planting so that it would come adjacent to the garbage disposal building. Right, so you're going to go. Right, so you're going to go into the laneway and then tuck back in as.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right. And then additionally, probably because this is going to block sight lines, you probably want to have a convex mirror or something on the wall above the door there, so that you can see a person entering the avenue. I noticed that both the main door into the vestibule, there's not a lot of space on the left side of the door. So I'd encourage you to make that an automatic door, as well as the entrance door to the usable open space. Doesn't look like it has sufficient space on the left side of the door, so that too should be an automatic door. I'd also encourage you, where you can, with the bathrooms, to have the doors swing out or have pocket doors, at least one of the bathrooms in each unit, so that they can be visible. And
Sorry, Sarah, what was that last comment? About the bathrooms?
oh, that at least one of the bathrooms is either a pocket door or a door that opens out, so that the bathrooms can be visible. So you can get into the bathroom, not necessarily turn around and close the door.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Privacy.
thanks.
Yeah, I think those are my main comments. I would also just be cognizant of the door opening out of the commercial space on the southwest corner, that could be a hazard to somebody walking along the sidewalk. That's it. This looks great.
Great, thanks for a comprehensive package and for answering all our questions in detail. Thanks for that. I like the building, it's a very striking design. I like the volumes and the distinct elements and how that breaks apart kind of as you go around the building. It's a very vertical expression on the corner, which is appropriate, but also note that the guidelines speak to about maintaining views, and I understand there's a view analysis forthcoming, so I'll defer to staff for analysis of that. For me, it's really about the public realm and the interaction with the building. I think, as my comments said along second, that really breaks down, and I think you could work with staff on the design with Victoria Street and do a better job with having that continuous weather protection, both at the gap on the southern edge and then just continuously with storms. And then I appreciate on the corner how you've taken a notch out of the building to provide the plaza, but I don't think it's a trade-off for the public space. It is still a private space. If that, depending on the tenant, if they do serve liquor, they will be required to fence it off, so it's no longer even reads as a semi-public space. So though it's nice, it takes some massing away from that corner. I think you still need to put a bit more into the public realm as well, and maybe that's not a full plaza street treatment on the corner, but perhaps it's some gesture with seating or other simple elements. So yeah, both the private and the public. Other than that, just quick points about staff's comments. Generally, I feel the convex mirrors, in my personal experience, can work, and then the amenity space, look carefully at that as far as upping that space requirement. That's my comments.
Well, I've really enjoyed looking at this project. It's quite complicated by the time you kind of really go through it a few times. So I commend you on the nice simple diagrams that you created, which was your massing diagrams or your party to kind of how to begin this project. So that's really helpful for us to understand and gives you a good kind of departure point in your design process. I think overall landscape and building are really good, and so the rest are just kind of comments and for what they're worth. Also like the forethought of getting rid of wall acne and creating spaces in the soffits. Because inevitably those bloody fire vents and bathroom vents poke out, right? So creating opportunities for them is good. I would kind of look at the entry, the lobby, so it's commercial and residential, and maybe how to give it a little bit more punch, and maybe there's some simplification there too. It's not that big of a building. There is a lot going on, so perhaps the next revision is some editing. Level 3 landscape, the common space, I actually like it. It's a light well. So when that building comes to the south, this is almost like an old style hotel that had kind of all those necessary light wells along the way. So I think it will be a valuable space, not just as an open space, but light in the future. The planting overall, I really like. The palette, the strategies. I mean, it's too bad second doesn't have, has the power lines that you can't have a real tree in there, and so we've got a bit of a shrubby tree. A nice one, just the same. On 2nd Avenue, I like the banding that Jenna talked about. I wonder on 2nd Avenue if there'd be a band there, or at least control joints for cane travelers, so that there's the ability to kind of follow and navigate that elevation or that street frontage. It looks like you've got one on the Victoria side, but perhaps maybe it needs it on the second side too. And just thinking about that cane traveling and detection. The ramp, I'm encouraged by it. I think, we need to kind of start thinking a little differently. I mean, you go to Europe and there's all kinds of tight little spots and stuff. Granted, they're not driving F-150s, but I think I would encourage you to explore that solution, but as as mentioned earlier, you've got to prove it out. And I think just a mirror isn't probably a really good solution. I think you need to go through the whole scenario and do the turning radiuses down at the alley and the waiting spot where the car coming up sees the flashing light, and all go through that whole process. Because I would encourage kind of less ramping and more real space. The garbage, I think you can pull off an interior connection kind of right behind the doors that you've got swinging there. It depends which plan you look at, where the garbage cans are, but anyhow, I would lose the street door and get that internal to the project where you're behind the PMT there, or just to the side of the PMT. Because I think it's critical to be able to just take out the garbage without wandering in front of all the CRUs. Looks like there's maybe a bike conflict between your loading zone on Second and the bike store, so maybe there's a better spot for those bikes. And if you're trying to lobby for that loading zone, perhaps that's also a stopping zone. So, if somebody pulls up and needs to let a client out, or somebody who has limited mobility, there's a good spot to quickly let them off and move on. Parking maneuvers in the parking spaces, I think you need to either, go through those maneuvers. I think you need something on the ends of those aisles in order to pull out that last stall. Level 6 planting, I'd say either plant level 6 or don't. There's such a little bit of planting there, I'd say why bother, or do it with more purpose. It'd be a shame just to send up like gardeners for that little bit. And go through all the hassle of getting irrigation and check valves and all this thing up there. I think that's it. Yeah, it's a really good project. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Really detailed project. It's so great to have so much detail, because then we can have really meaningful discussions, and it does take a little while to go through, but that's really great. I was really excited to see this project as well, because I think it actually raises the bar for architecture in downtown, which is great. I really like the pedestrian treatment around the ground floor as well. I like the broken up facade, lots of interest. It is a really complex project, but it doesn't appear too complex from the outside, so it's a really great balance. I would really encourage to move the garbage building, to move the garbage room, or provide an interior only access. I don't think we should be having street access to garbage facilities. I would encourage you to maybe add some of the really nice screening we've got elsewhere on the building to that east side, which could help alleviate any fears from planners that you have a blank wall there, and it would also help with some of the privacy. And then also I would just, with the amenity variance, I think that if there is space within a large building like this, it should be kept as a requirement, that it shouldn't be, because someone else talked about setting precedent, and I think that this would set a precedent for removing amenity space from every building, because it's easier to put a suite there. But other than that, I think, it looks awesome. Thanks.
I guess one of my comments is that just for the functionality of the commercial space, I'm hoping there's some way that the rear entries can be achieved, at least there's one unit where it doesn't run into a parking stall. But I think it's pretty important for functionality and for loading and storage and all that kind of stuff. I'm also going to say on the second floor, you're probably likely going to need a hallway along the length of the south side of the 2,800 square foot commercial. That would allow for smaller units going along that area. But that's something that could happen later, I imagine. And I'm not sure if you've looked at having vent stack, if you expect the bottom units to be some kind of restaurant, or it's a mechanical issue, but you might think of that to the rooftop. I've run into that in past buildings. when it wasn't thought of ahead of time, it's really hard to do after. Sorry, impossible. My main comment is about parking, and I noticed that you've severely reduced the commercial stalls. And I'm just finding that the reality of commercial is if you don't have the parking and you think that it's going to happen somewhere else nearby on the public realm, it's not. The viability of the commercial space becomes severely hampered, like it really does. And so it almost gets to a point where it's no use building the commercial because it's just not going to work. Shop owners going to be in there going, I'm wondering where all my customers are because it's just not practical for them to arrive. So, and given the challenges with the design of the parkade as it is on a small site, it's pointing to the direction that there's just too much density for the amount of parking that's achievable on the site. And I'm sorry to be the person to say that, but I think that's the reality. Probably need 6 less units upstairs to make everything work. Developer wants to hear that, but it's just the reality of building on a floodplain on small lots. So that would be my main comment. I think it's very serious. I think parking is a very serious concern. With that said, everything else about the building I really like. I love the design. I agree with my colleagues here on all of the other comments. And I especially like the cut corner at the street level. I wish we had more of that in downtown. But we definitely need to have a look at what works in terms of parking and access to the commercial space. And that would be my comment. So any further?
Can I just have one more thing? Sorry, I was looking for this before my comments. It's on the last page in the guidelines. It just says privately owned public open spaces should have a public right-of-way registered on title to ensure public access at all times, to be discussed. So just a note of caution to both staff and the applicant about depending on the terms of that right-of-way and how it will affect eventual tenants and businesses and viability. So particularly to my comments about liquor service and required fencing. So we'd all agree a beer on a patio is a good thing and it creates vibrancy on the street. So hence my comments, if that plays out, you need to have a public option as well as far as benches and Thanks.
And my comment is just that a curb cut should be added to the loading zone. So for loading and dropping off.
Sorry, just, could you just quickly review the 5 points that you were looking back to us for comment on? I just want to make sure that we cover them all. Just
I think we have covered them all. We're looking at the south and east elevations, comments on the driveway, and then comments on the awning.
Oh, okay, just those 3?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So I will read through the potential recommendations once again. Option A is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and does not need to see this project returned for further review. Option B is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve the following recommendations. Option C is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like, should hopefully be in general, and would like the applicant to resolve the following recommendations and return to present the revised project to the advisory design panel. And option D, that the advisory design panel does not support the project as presented for the following reasons. I have a motion for which option?
Motion C. Number C.
Okay, so we have a motion for C, that the project come back to advisory design panel. Can we have some discussion around that?
Guess we need a seconder first.
Okay. Before discussion? Yeah. Anyone second that?
I can second the motion.
Okay. Discussion?
Are we expecting radical, big changes to be seen at the second, if they come back again?
Just mentioning the parking seemed to be quite an issue and the turning points and radiuses of that seem to be quite an issue.
But isn't that
Tim?
typically dealt with by a traffic engineer?
You guys decide.
The only issue really, I think, is what's being pointed out is that if there was a form and character shift as a result of, right? So I think that could be parking.
Mhm.
And it also could be in and around the fact that your comment about the tightness of the site, maybe it does need to loosen up a little bit just to meet some of these criteria. I think the third item is that, is planning, are they convinced that the form of the southern development will actually fit with this project or not? And if those have been answered.
And
So I think and the only, maybe the icing on top of that might be is can that be softened and can the building be less aggressive perhaps on the other sides to satisfy planning requests or not? And those are the questions for you guys.
And the other point is that how much of an impact of the redesign of Victoria will impact this building, the design of this building, in light of these other comments?
The redesign of Victoria is an ongoing process, and I don't know when it'll be done, or whether it'll be done before this project moves through.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to hang it on the
No.
outcomes of another planning
Fair
process.
enough.
I feel generally the questions we've raised is something that staff can handle at a technical level, and I don't think it needs to come back to us.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I think, the project is an exceptional project. It's got some stuff that needs to be ironed out. As long as the form and character doesn't change, then I would be comfortable to leave it with staff.
I tend to think that the parking versus the density is a major issue, but I'm not sure if that's something that we can deal with in ADP here for a rerun or bringing it back to ADP. I think it's a comment that perhaps planning and or council need to consider. Would you agree that that's not really an element that we can hold the project up and bring it back for?
I would agree with that, if they meet the zoning and the DP guidelines.
Yeah.
He's concerned.
Yeah, it's not really our
territory.
territory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it's called.
Yeah.
appreciated though, but
No,
I do need
It's better
to
to
call.
understand the process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we'll call the question, and then if we need to revisit a different option, then we can. So all in favor
Sorry, all in favor of option C?
of option C?
Okay.
Sorry. All against? Fails. And we will come back to
I'll make a motion for option B.
motion for option B.
Second.
I think we know where we're going with this. Any discussion? Not needed? Then we'll call the question. All in favor for B? Against? It's unanimous. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith.
Presented, but both of them have comments about it, so
Exactly.
we're going to get rid of as presented and suggest to put in general, support the project in general, but then either you need to come back to panel or you need to deal with staff.
See, that's why it was confusing to me.
Yeah.
So that's just for C?
No,
And
well,
Or
we're
C
suggesting
for
B
all
and
as
C.
presented.
A is as presented because it's go away,
Yeah.
you're done. Good?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And D is not supported, so.
Yeah,
So
So B and C should have in general
instead
of
of
as
as
presented.
presented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Carly?
Yeah, got it.
And we'll note that in our minutes. Anyone want to move for termination?
Is there anything from council?
So, sorry.
Nothing from council?
We don't have anything outstanding now.
Okay.
Okay, who was the mover for the termination?
Who's the terminator?
Second.
And I don't think you
This determination.